Hello, welcome. This is going to be your second class for the Adolescent Society. So this is based on Chapter 2 of the textbook, and the title of that is Biological Foundations. So as I really stressed in first class, adolescence is a culturally constructed period of life. Depending on the part of the world you live in, the culture that you're immersed in, as well as whether you're male or female, how you experience this stage of life can vary quite drastically. And the little stories at the beginning of the chapter demonstrate this quite well. However, the biological changes that occur during this period of time are a central part of development for everybody, no matter where you live. Girls will begin to menstruate and develop breasts, among other physical changes typical of females, and boys will start to experience ejaculation and their voice will grow deeper, among other changes typical of males. It doesn't matter your race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religion, what period of history you live in, if you live in an urban or rural environment. There is no escaping this process. And it all seems so simple when you're a kid, and I don't mean this sarcastically or even really to be humorous. Before puberty starts, you slowly but surely get taller, you slowly but surely get bigger, you slowly but surely are expected to learn more difficult things in school. Every year your shoes go the next size up. Every year the size you take in clothes increases by a size or so. And every year more is expected of you at school. And every year your interests probably change slightly. But we don't have these huge spurts in development. There's usually no huge changes in how your family interacts with you, or regarding what their expectations are of you. There's no huge changes, usually, in how you interact with the opposite sex. And then these weird things start happening. You have body hair where you've never had body hair before. Maybe the skin in your face begins to get more oily, and as a result, you start breaking out. Maybe you get breakouts on your back. The general shape of your body begins to change because girls start to develop breasts and boys begin to fill out in their upper body. Boys begin to grow facial hair. For both boys and girls, some may have a growth spurt. So they leave school at the end of grade 7 for the summer, and by the time they come back in September for grade 8, they've gone up more than a size. Sometimes the changes that happen are exciting for the person experiencing them. They like the idea of getting older, they like the idea of being more grown up, and they want it to happen even faster. They like that people no longer see them as a little kid. Sometimes the developments that occur are not always so great. So girls find out exactly what menstrual cramps are and how unpleasant they can be. The aggravation of always having to make sure they have feminine hygiene products with them. Trying to bring these into the bathroom at school without other students noticing because they find it embarrassing. And from what I've been told, since I'm not male, boys have to deal with wet dreams, that they sometimes have involuntary erections that occur at really embarrassing times that they have little to no control over. And their voice changes, but this isn't always a smooth transition. Both sexes have to deal with their skin breaking out. So going through all these changes associated with puberty may be something that people look forward to, something they want to happen. But they can also be uncomfortable and embarrassing and sometimes even painful and cause quite a bit of stress and anxiety at times. If you think about exactly what puberty is, the word puberty is derived from the Latin word pubescere, which means to grow hairy. Perhaps an accurate description, but not exactly a pretty one. And it really does cause an upset, developmentally speaking, after the typical expected growth of childhood. If you think of somebody's picture in grade 1 to their picture in grade 12, the difference is usually really significant. So let's laugh at me. On the left, I was actually about 5 years old, and on the right, I think I was in about grade 10 or 11. Yes, it was the 80s and big hair was in. And in the middle, I'm in about grade 4. So when you look at somebody, for example, at age 5 or 6 compared to 17 or 18, it's not just that they're taller and bigger, But usually the childhood pudginess is gone and the whole shape of their body has changed. It's been redistributed. They have a more adult shape overall. It's not uncommon for a relative to look at you when you haven't seen them for a while and say, "Look at you, you don't look like a little kid anymore." And that's essentially what they're saying. And even our bodies function differently because puberty means that we are now capable of sexual reproduction. And I know we don't think of that when a girl starts to get her period for the first time or when a boy is noticeably becoming more mature, but that's what that means. They can now have children. So I want to explain what actually occurs to kickstart puberty, though not in great detail. I'm not going to go into as much detail as the textbook does, and I don't want you to be concerned about memorizing every tiny little thing in this section. But I do want you to be aware, in general terms, what starts puberty and how it works. So when you're reviewing this information here in the textbook, I want you to picture a game of dominoes. When one piece does something, it causes another piece to fall, which causes another piece to fall, and so on. And that is essentially what the process of puberty is like. And yes, what I say here is going to be almost exactly what the textbook says because it's factual information, and frankly, there's not a lot of different ways to say it. Puberty always starts with the endocrine system, and that's just the network of glands in your body. So where does puberty take place? The endocrine system. Now, the hypothalamus is part of this, and that's what stimulates and regulates hormones. Hormones, we tend to use this word kind of flagrantly. We tend to use it incorrectly in everyday conversation. You know, watch out, she's really hormonal today, or something like that. But what hormones actually do is affect the development of the body. So puberty begins when the hypothalamus, which is this tiny little thing about the size of a bean located in the lower part of the brain, increases production of something called GnRH. So again, we've got the dominoes moving here. So before anybody can even see that you've started puberty, before you really even feel like you've started puberty, it actually starts a couple years beforehand because your body has increased the production of this GnRH and you don't realize it. Why does your body suddenly start doing this? Because your body reaches a certain threshold of fat cells. This is why if somebody is excessively thin, for example, if they have a serious eating disorder or because of poor health in general, puberty will often be delayed because their body simply doesn't have enough fat cells in it to start, to kickstart this process. So again, try to keep this as simple as possible. Your body reaches a certain level of fat cells. That's the first domino, which signals the hypothalamus to start producing more GnRH. That's the next domino, which in turn will affect the pituitary gland at the base of the brain. That's the next domino, which stimulates the development of gametes. Gametes are just cells that are distinctive to each sex. If you're a female, it's going to cause the development of egg cells and ovaries. And if you're male, it's going to cause sperm for the male. So you might not be aware that most males and not most, we all do. All males and females actually have female sex hormones and male sex hormones. So we all have both of them. But if you're female, you'll have more of the female sex hormones. And if you're male, you'll have more of the male sex hormones. And it's the increases in these hormones that cause the majority of the observable changes during puberty. So facial hair in males, breast development in females. So both of these sex hormones are produced in both males and females. If you're female, you do produce testosterone. And if you're male, you do produce estrogen. But the levels are very, very different. Throughout childhood, the levels are relatively similar. But then once puberty hits, this is when estrogen production rises in females and androgens rise in males, which causes most of the observable changes during puberty. Now, maybe you're thinking, okay, so we've got these dominoes, this causes this causes this causes this, each one's causing something else to happen. Well, if the production of sex hormones increases so much during puberty, do they stay that high? If they do stay that high, what's the result? And the answer to that is no. Everybody, so this is just showing sex differences in hormonal changes during puberty. Like I said, I'm going to get ahead of myself with the slides. So this is showing, for example, that girls, their estrogen takes off, but their testosterone stays low, and the opposite for boys. So this doesn't continue through our whole life. I think it would be problematic if it did. Our bodies seem to have a natural set point. So whether you're male or female, once your sex hormones reach an optimal level, production backs off. So think of it like a thermostat. You set your house at 70 or whatever you set it at. When the temperature reaches 70, where the thermostat is, what happens? The heat clicks off. Why? Because it's reached the point that you've set it to reach. Now, if the house goes below 70, it's going to kick back on. And that's what happens with our sex hormone production. So it really is a feedback loop, just like your thermostat has a feedback loop. I find if you can keep that example in mind, it just all keeps it a little bit more straight, a little bit more simple. So again, I want you to be aware of what kind of hormones males and females have. I want you to be aware of the system within which this all takes place. But I'm not going to be asking you for all these tiny, tiny little details, what causes what. So what's going to happen during puberty? We're going to grow. Because of the increase in levels of sex hormones, there's pretty dramatic physical changes that occur during the period of adolescence, as you know. As I said, before this, everything seems to be slow and steady. Everybody grows, but there's no huge surges in growth for most people. You know, I'm picturing the old child's story about the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise just keeps at the race in a slow and steady manner. But then when puberty hits, it's like you become the rabbit. This causes a surge in growth. In fact, one of the earliest signs that puberty is about to arrive in an adolescent is a growth spurt, which would be a rapid increase in height. And that is exactly what an adolescent growth spurt is, the rapid increase in height that takes place at the beginning of puberty. It's not unusual to grow up to 3.5 inches in 1 year for a girl, or for a boy to grow up to 4.1 inches in 1 year. This is the highest rate of growth a human being will go through since they were a toddler. I mean, think about that. That much growth in height in just 1 year. Maybe you went through this. Maybe you know somebody who went through this. It's not standard, but it's also not terribly unusual. This is when growing pains sometimes occur, which are real. They're not just a mythical term. Growing pains mean that your bones are growing at such a rate that the tendons and things around the bones are not keeping up quite as much as they should, and it can be very uncomfortable. Sometimes the term growing pains is used as a general term to describe the angst and stress of growing up, but real growing pains mean you are sore. And it is true that girls tend to reach puberty before boys. I know we like to tease boys and we like to make flip comments about, oh, boys are always behind girls, but it's actually true that girls tend to find themselves at the beginning of their peak height growth about 2 years before boys. And before puberty, throughout childhood, boys tend to be slightly taller than girls who are the same age. But girls then become taller on average around 11 to 13 because they've started puberty earlier. So it's not unusual to have girls be taller than boys at a certain point. But they also stop growing earlier than boys do. Now, as I talk about this, I keep using words like usually or typically, implying that for the vast majority of kids going through this part of adolescence, this is what happens. This is the norm. This is typical normal development. For the vast majority, this is what they should expect. But during the adolescent growth spurt, there can also be a certain amount of asynchronicity in growth too, simply meaning uneven growth in some way, maybe uneven development. This is why sometimes when you look at kids in the early adolescent stage, they look kind of gangly. I always say they look like a 7-month-old golden retriever puppy, all arms and legs and a little bit uncoordinated. And it's almost like they're not comfortable in their own body, like they're growing too fast in some ways to really adjust to it well, which is often then reflected in their lack of coordination. We always used to tease my oldest brother because he was such a klutz. He would trip going up the stairs. He rode his bike into a parked car. He was downhill skiing, skied into a tree, and his contacts popped out. But he really was truly awkward. For boys, the torso, chest, and shoulders are the last parts of the body to be affected by the growth spurt, as well as for girls, and therefore the last to reach the end of their growth. So when I say that sometimes it seems like a young person is all arms and legs, sometimes their extremities really have grown faster than the rest of their body. But there may also be much more uncomfortable, embarrassing asynchronicity in growth. It's also not unusual, especially in the early years of puberty, for girls, for one breast to develop at a slightly different rate than the other, so that the girl may be slightly lopsided. Just at that point in your life, when you're becoming much more aware of your peers, of their evaluation of you, just when you're typically much more concerned with your appearance and are trying to develop a good sense of self, and this happens. Now, this is really not very unusual, and while a girl may be concerned that she will always be lopsided, breast size usually evens out in a year or so. And actually, our bodies are not completely symmetrical anyways. Your feet are not 100% the exact same size. If you wear glasses and go to get them adjusted, you know that your ears are not exactly symmetrical in terms of where they are in your head on both sides. Sometimes, however, the difference in breast size can be very significant and thus very noticeable, resulting in asymmetrical breasts, not just a slight difference or being lopsided. Usually, this resolves itself. I happen to know somebody who in high school, this is why I have this picture here, because when I talk about this in class, I try to explain to my students that she had one side that was an A cup and one side that was a C cup. And I think most young boys, most young men, are not completely familiar with how bras are sized. So I use this picture as a visual to show them the difference in her breast sizes. And this was in high school. So you can imagine how upsetting and unsettling this would be for her. We say that, we had grade 13 at that time, all the way through high school, she wore 3 to 4 layers. It didn't matter how hot it was in June, and our school was not air conditioned, she wore 3 to 4 layers. And eventually, for her, this evened out. Now, if it doesn't even out, yes, a girl could have plastic surgery to even out. But the thing is, a doctor would not even consider that until breast development had stopped and was complete for about 6 to 12 months. So it's not like you can just go in and fix it right away. Turning to males, during this stage, there is also a growth spurt in muscle because of the increase in testosterone. And because boys experience greater increases in testosterone production than girls do, they experience greater muscle growth than girls do, which is one of the factors that contribute to boys having more of a male shape and girls more of a typical female shape. So there's an increase in levels of body fat during puberty for everybody, male and female. But Body fat increases more for girls than boys. Because of this, the sex differences in muscle and fat growth during puberty, boys have less body fat than girls do usually. Hips widen more than shoulders for girls, while shoulders widen more than hips for boys. This is just the way we're all made. And what's the point of all this? At the end of puberty, what's the result? Well, the result is that the body is ready for sexual reproduction. Females are ready to be impregnated and can carry a child, while males are ready to impregnate a female. And even to me, it seems odd to associate puberty so clearly with the ability to become pregnant or to impregnate somebody. We generally don't think of it that way when we look at someone that age, but that is, in fact, what the result of puberty is. So this involves primary and secondary sex characteristics. Primary sex characteristics have to do with actual reproduction. Secondary sex characteristics are those not directly related to reproduction. So, when levels of sex hormones increase during puberty, this causes eggs to develop in the ovaries of females and sperm to be produced in the testes of males. But there's a difference here, because females are born with the eggs, but males are not born with sperm. Females typically are born with about 400,000 immature eggs in each ovary. I think we forget sometimes that females are born with eggs. We don't actually produce them from scratch as we grow up. By the time a girl reaches puberty, that 400,000 has usually declined to about 80,000. And then once a girl begins menstruating, one egg develops into a mature egg or ovum every 28 days or so. What this means is for a female, during her reproductive lifetime, she'll release about 400 ova, and during each menstrual cycle, usually one egg will mature and become an ovum. But usually for around the first 2 years when a girl first starts menstruating, she's actually not ovulating. It's usually only in the 3rd or 4th year that she can actually become pregnant because she's releasing an egg. And when a girl first starts menstruating, the term for this is menarche. So menarche is the first time a girl gets her period, just the very first time. Now, with all of this, however, keep in mind that a lot of girls and adult women have irregular periods. So they may not have a period every single month, and that there are a whole range of factors that can affect the regularity of a woman's period. So her general health overall, stress, nutrition, medications, if she develops an illness. So keep that in mind. Now, on the other hand, boys are not born with sperm. They do not have sperm in their testes when they're born that mature. And they don't produce sperm until they reach puberty. On average, a boy begins producing sperm at age 12, and once this happens, I'm not making a joke here, they produce a lot. One male ejaculation typically has between 30 and 500 million sperm, which means the average male produces millions of sperm every day. And in all seriousness, that's a lot. Why do they produce so much? Well, one theory that kind of has an evolutionary tone to it is that the female body is not a hospitable place for male sperm, that the female immune system recognizes it as a foreign body, and so they need to produce a lot of sperm in order to eventually be successful and impregnate somebody. So much, like I said, an evolutionary bent to it. And compared to their size, sperm do have a long way to go to reach the ovum through various structures in the female anatomy. So it helps having a lot trying to get there because it increases the likelihood that some will eventually reach their destination, fertilize an egg, and allow the human species to continue. So the first time a female has her period, that's called menarche, And the first time a boy produces sperm is called spermarsh. If we look at the secondary sex characteristics, these are all the changes that don't directly relate to reproduction. You don't need to tell you that there's differences between males and females. But at the same time, we're more alike than you might think, because both males and females will start to grow body hair in places they haven't had it before. In the pubic areas, under their arms. Yes, males will start to grow facial hair and to get more hairy overall, such as on their arms and legs. But females, their hair on their arms and legs also increases. Usually not as much as boys, but it does grow more. So an increase in body hair is something that males and females have in common, although, like I said, there's some difference. Both will usually experience a difference in their skin. And boy, do I remember this. During puberty, your body naturally sweats more, it's oilier more, making it more prone to breakouts. In addition, for some, this means the body is more prone to body odor. And I'm not picking on boys here, but this seems to be more true for boys. If you're around teenage boys, if you go into a room where they are, it just smells like boy, a combination of sweat and body odor. They seem to need to put on deodorant more than boys do. Both males and females also undergo breast development to a certain extent, even though we think of this only in regard to girls. And when this development is more pronounced than it really should be for boys, it also will eventually even out. Girls will develop what are called breast buds around 9 or 10, maybe earlier, maybe later. There's no absolute select time. And the areola will also begin to expand. And it's not uncommon for a female for one breast bud to appear before the other, which can be alarming for them as well as their parents. So there may be enough concern that the parents are concerned that the girls have a cyst or an abscess of some kind. So they go to see their doctor about it, when in fact it's pretty typical. So overall then, to summarize all of this so far, this is what happens. This is what naturally occurs in every single female and every single male in the world when they begin puberty, unless there is a specific health-related reason that stops it, which would include really, really poor nutrition. It might be a little earlier in some, it might be a little later in some. There may be some variation in the outward effects and rates of growth, but it's going to happen. There's no escaping it.